Welcome back to yet another weird Yu-Gi-Oh card effects, and I think this is episode 6. If you want to check out the other episodes, there is a playlist on my channel, but basically this is a series where we look at old school Yu-Gi-Oh card text and how those cards have changed over the years. This is not meant to look at the meta game of old school versus new school Yu-Gi-Oh, but rather focus on how the card text has changed as Yu-Gi-Oh has gotten older, because old school Yu-Gi-Oh cards were written in a very strange way, as we've looked at in this series. First up, we have a very curious normal magic card, Swords of Revealing Light. Now this thing probably should have been a continuous spell card or a continuous magic card or whatever, and if you remember back in the original starter decks, they did mention continuous magic cards in the rulebook. However, Magic Ruler was the very first time that continuous magic cards were printed, and this thing was out of LOB, which means that yeah, it's not a continuous magic. Already that's pretty weird, but when you read the original effect, you might notice a couple things are missing, especially considering this is a normal magic card. So the original version of Swords of Revealing Light, the first edition version, says, counting from your opponent's turn, none of your opponent's monsters can attack for 3 turns of his or her own. When this card is activated, opponents face down monsters at that time are turned face up but remain in defense position. Any effects the monsters may have are immediately activated, obviously referring to flip effects like Maneater Bug or whatever. So the weirdest part about Swords of Revealing Light, at least in the original printing, is that nowhere on the card does it imply that Swords remains face up during those 3 turns. That is pretty strange, because I think all of us back in the day just assumed that it was on the field face up for those 3 turns. There are obviously other funny parts about this card. I think the any effects the monsters may have are immediately activated is pretty silly, but generally speaking, the most confusing part about the original printing of Swords of Revealing Light is the fact that, yeah, it doesn't really mention that it does stay on the field and then it gets destroyed after those 3 turns. This was fixed in the very next printing of Swords of Revealing Light, which was in Starter Deck Yu-Gi Evolution, but let's take a look at the most recent version of this card and see how it's changed. The most recent printing of Swords of Revealing Light says this: after this card's activation, it remains on the field, but destroy it during the end phase of your opponent's 3rd turn. When this card is activated, if your opponent controls a face-down monster, flip all monsters they control face up. While this card is face up on the field, your opponent's monsters cannot declare an attack. Honestly, I'm surprised that this card has never been changed to a continuous spell card, because it pretty much clearly is supposed to be one, but it's whatever. At least the most recent printing of the card mentions, as well as the other printings besides the very first one, that it stays up on the field face up during those 3 turns. Next up, have you guys ever read the original printing of Exodia the Forbidden One? It's pretty ridiculous. Obviously this card is really iconic, and I think that even the most casual of players will know how it works without reading the effect, but they do have to actually make it an effect monster. So here's what the original version of Exodia from LOB said: an automatic victory can be declared by the player whose hand contains this card together with the left leg / right leg / left arm / right arm of the Forbidden One. I love this text. I think it's hilarious having left leg and all the slashes there. We don't really see that on cards, and I don't know how many people watching this video will understand what I'm saying, but many of the old school Yu-Gi-Oh cards are written in a passive voice, which is very strange, especially compared to more recent prints. So for example, this one, instead of saying you win the duel, it says an automatic victory can be declared, and a lot of old school cards are written in a very similar way. Anyway, let's take a look at the most recent printing of Exodia and see how it changed. So this thing now says, if you have right leg of the Forbidden One, left leg of the Forbidden One, right arm of the Forbidden One, and left arm of the Forbidden One, in addition to this card in your hand, you win the duel. This time it doesn't use all those slashes, it actually spells out each and every one of those pieces of Exodia, which is how the card should work. I mean, I'm not sure if it matters in the long run, but technically with Yu-Gi-Oh cards, if you are specifically mentioning certain cards in another card's effect, you have to put the card name in quotation marks. That's just how it works, which is why the more recent printings of Exodia are written this way. Next up, we have one that I think is really funny for anyone that does understand problem-solving card text, but might not be as funny to just the more casual viewers, but I'll try my best to explain it. The original original printing from Magic Ruler of Thunder Dragon says this: discard this card from your hand to the graveyard to add up to 2 Thunder Dragon in quotation cards from your deck to your hand. Your deck is then shuffled. This effect is activated only during a main phase. So the last 2 sentences of this card are pretty hilarious. I mean, we've already talked about the deck being shuffled, being written on older cards, and the fact that it says that you can only activate it during the main phase is pretty funny as well. There really weren't that many quick effects back then anyway, but yeah, you can't use Thunder Dragon during the standby phase or the draw phase or the battle phase or whatever. It has to be during the main phase. Where this card is really funny though, and I'm sure many of you have already noticed it, is that it says you can add up to 2 Thunder Dragon cards from your deck to your hand, instead of saying you can add up to 2 Thunder Dragons. This might not sound important, but take a look at a card like Cyber Emergency, which says you can add 1 Cyber Dragon in quotation marks monster from your deck to your hand. Compare this to a card like Cyber Rev System, which says special summon 1 Cyber Dragon from your hand or graveyard, which means that you can only summon a card whose actual name is Cyber Dragon with no other words. That being said, one of the reasons this card is so good in Cyber Dragon decks is that many of these Cyber Dragon support monsters actually do treat themselves as literal Cyber Dragon while they're in the graveyard, so that they actually work with cards like this. But still, if you have a Cyber Dragon monster that has Cyber Dragon in the name while in the graveyard but doesn't actually take the name of Cyber Dragon, Cyber Rev System cannot revive it. It has to actually be Cyber Dragon, or at least be treated as having that name. For example here, Toon Cyber Dragon is searchable by Cyber Emergency because it is a Cyber Dragon monster. It does include Cyber Dragon in the name, but because it's not Cyber Dragon while in the graveyard, it's Toon Cyber Dragon in the graveyard, Rev System cannot revive it. So that is a pretty big difference. Now back in the day, for a long time, there were no other Thunder Dragon monsters that would be found in your main deck besides the original Thunder Dragon. Once again, I apologize if you're watching this video and you haven't played Yu-Gi-Oh in a while. This might have been a little bit confusing, but yes, in Yu-Gi-Oh, Thunder Dragon's original effect would be super overpowered the way that it used to be written. Nowadays though, there are tons of Thunder Dragons in the main deck: Thunder Dragon Dark, Thunder Dragon Roar, Thunder Dragon Hawk, and with this original printing of Thunder Dragon, if they never would have changed it, that card actually could be discarded to search 2 copies of any of the other Thunder Dragon cards. I mean, Thunder Dragon, even with how it's supposed to work when it's written correctly, is still obviously a very key part of a Thunder Dragon strategy, as it should be, but with this previous version of the effect, I mean, it would have just been insanely strong, being able to search any number of other Thunder Dragon monsters, not just itself. Just for comparison here, the most recent printing of Thunder Dragon simply says you can discard this card, add up to 2 Thunder Dragon from your deck to your hand. Next up we have Change of Heart, and this card isn't super crazy. Even the original printing isn't really that funny, but it does miss like 1 word that I feel should have been there. So the original version of Change of Heart says this: select and control 1 opposing monster regardless of position on the field until the end of your turn. I feel like this card should say select and take control of 1 opposing monster. I feel like take is missing from the original print, which obviously is true because we now know that this card is supposed to be written like this: target 1 monster your opponent controls, take control of it until the end phase. Yeah, they didn't even have to include regardless of position. That's like my favorite set of words on any old school card. It's always hilarious. And finally, we have Cyber Jar out of Magic Ruler. I'm going to apologize in advance here. The scan that I have for this original printing is really bad, so I'm not even sure if I'll be able to zoom in on the effect, but I will read it for you guys as it was originally written. Cyber Jar said, flip destroys all monsters on the field, including this monster. Both players then pick up, not draw, 5 cards from the top of their respective decks and show the cards to each other. Immediately special summon any monster cards of level 4 or lower among them on the field in face-up attack position or face-down defense position. The rest of the cards picked up are placed in the player's hands. Compared to many old school cards, Cyber Jar is admittedly a lot more complicated. There are many moving parts for this one effect, but let's take a look at the most recent printing of Cyber Jar and see how they were able to shorten the effect. This one says flip, destroy all monsters on the field, then both players reveal the top 5 cards of their decks, then special summon all revealed level 4 or lower monsters in face-up attack position or face-down defense position. Also add any remaining cards to their hand. If either player has less than 5 cards in their deck, reveal as many as possible. Admittedly, I think this effect could be shortened even more. I'm not sure why it doesn't excavate cards. That seems like it would make sense, but it is what it is. Obviously, the card has been banned for a very long time, so it's not super high on Konami's priority list to make its effect even shorter. Anyway though, thank you guys so much for watching episode 6 of Weird Yu-Gi-Oh! Card Effects. Like I said, make sure to check out the playlist of all of the other episodes if you guys haven't had a chance to watch those yet. There's tons of hilarious old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Effects that we talk about in those previous installments. I'll see you guys later though. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.